Flight Attendant Mocks Disabled Man cries when he returns as her boss. Welcome to today's gripping tale, a story of injustice, redemption, and unexpected twists that prove the world is far smaller and far more surprising than we often believe. We will follow a flight attendant whose careless cruelty toward a disabled passenger spirals into consequences she never anticipated. As if fate itself intervenes, her life is thrust into chaos when that very same passenger reappears in the most unimaginable way. Prepare for heartbreak, triumph, and a reckoning long overdue. This dramatic narrative will take you from a busy airport terminal to the hidden corners of corporate corridors, reminding us that respect and kindness should never be underestimated. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. The hum of engines vibrated through the cabin of the Boeing 737 parked at the gate of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Passengers bustled along the aisle, jostling for overhead bin space and wrestling with suitcases. The flight attendants, clad in crisp uniforms, offered tight-lipped smiles. One flight attendant, Savannah, seemed particularly harried that morning, though it was not just from the usual stress of pre-departure responsibilities. Lately, her life had been a whirlwind of disappointments. A week earlier, she had received notice that the mortgage on her dream condo was being denied unless she found a co-signer. On top of that, her fiancé had abruptly called off their engagement. The emotional toll was written plainly across her face. She was busy slamming overhead bins shut and barking instructions to other crew members when she noticed an older gentleman slowly making his way down the aisle. He walked with a visible limp, one leg noticeably weaker than the other, and he leaned on a walking cane for support. Bumping against seats, swaying unsteadily, he was clearly exhausted from navigating the cramped plane. Savannah glanced at him with annoyance. She didn't want more complications. The flight from Dallas to Los Angeles was overbooked, and tensions were already mounting among the passengers. Her expression soured further when she realized he had a bulky carry-on bag that he struggled to stow. Her co-worker, an empathetic woman named Janice, was about to step in to help. "No, I've got it," Savannah snapped, forcing a chipper smile as she blocked Janice's path and hurried to the man's seat. Yet beneath her bright veneer lurked impatience. She wanted the plane boarded, sealed, and on its way no further delays. And in her current mood, pity or kindness was at a premium. The gentleman's face was etched with lines of weariness and hope. His name was Jonathan, though no one had bothered to ask just yet. He had planned this trip for months, a chance to visit a long-lost family member in Los Angeles, and possibly explore business opportunities that had opened up after decades of dedicated, often underappreciated, work. He was well aware of the difficulties his mobility challenges posed for him and for the people around him, but he never expected open hostility. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly, as Savannah wrestled the carry-on into the overhead bin. She almost rolled her eyes at how heavy it was. She was about to voice her annoyance when Jonathan carefully reached up to her, as though asking for one more favor. "Actually, I have medication in there that I need every few hours. May I keep it with me?" he asked. She huffed. "Sir, we have limited overhead bin space. You should have planned better." Her voice dripped with condescension, drawing a subtle frown from Janice, who overheard. Jonathan swallowed his pride. I suppose you're right. Could I at least get it out now, so I don't have to bother anyone later? That's not how this works." Savannah's voice rose, turning heads nearby. "Look at all these passengers trying to find space. I need to get everyone seated on time so we can actually take off. If you really need your medication, you should have kept it in a smaller bag. Next time, think ahead. The remark stung. Jonathan forced a nod and settled into his seat, sinking as low as he could, trying to vanish under the glare of the people behind him. The pitying looks he received felt almost as painful as Savannah's dismissive tone. Meanwhile, Janice was torn between confronting Savannah about her harshness and maintaining professional harmony. She settled for a silent glare, hoping her colleague would notice the disapproval. As the plane prepared for taxi, Savannah brushed past Jonathan again, accidentally nudging his cane. It clattered to the floor, and she huffed in exasperation, as though he had done it on purpose. "Are you serious?" she said under her breath. "Watch where you put that thing." Jonathan felt his face grow hot. He extended his hand awkwardly to retrieve the cane, but Savannah didn't bother to help him pick it up. Instead, she hurried off to secure the galley for takeoff. Jonathan finally managed to grasp it, forcing himself to keep breathing and remind himself that this trip was important. He couldn't let one rude flight attendant ruin it. Still, his heart sank. It had taken him years to gather the courage and the financial means to make this trip. Already the flight felt like a gauntlet he had to survive. The engines roared, and the aircraft pulled away from the gate. Half an hour later, the plane was at cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign blinked off. Savannah moved down the aisle with the beverage cart, plastering a mechanical smile on her face. Most passengers paid her little mind, but Jonathan's row brought out her impatience again. She noticed how uncomfortable he looked, his legs stiff and cramped. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her voice flat. He nodded politely. "Just water, please." Her mouth curled in a half sneer. "Ice? Yes, a bit, if you don't mind." "Fine," she responded, filling a plastic cup. She paused, a frown crossing her face. Her eyes flicked to his cane leaning against the seat. "You know, I don't see why people with your condition choose to travel if you're not prepared for it." She laughed, as if sharing a joke. "It just causes delays for everyone else. A lot of hassle for us flight attendants, you know." The words struck Jonathan like a physical blow. A few passengers nearby turned in shock. One or two let out a gasp at the cruelty lacing her comment. Janice tried to intervene. "Savannah, that's enough," she hissed. "We're here to help, not to judge." Savannah shrugged, then with forced cheerfulness offered Jonathan the water. "I'm only saying, next time maybe plan better. You're obviously struggling." Jonathan's stomach twisted. He couldn't recall the last time someone had spoken to him with such overt scorn. Traveling with a disability was challenging, but never had anyone been so openly resentful. His hand trembled slightly as he took the water. He tried to ignore her, but the embarrassment was burning deep. Janice immediately offered Jonathan a second cup of water and asked if he needed anything else. He nodded a grateful no, but his eyes shimmered with hurt. In a twist of immediate karma, as Savannah pushed the beverage cart further, turbulence suddenly rocked the plane. She lost her balance and spilled steaming coffee all over her own uniform. Passengers gasped. She let out a yelp of pain and humiliation, dropping the pot and scrambling to dab at her clothes. Jonathan, despite how she had treated him, instinctively reached for his napkins and tried to hand them over the seat. Here, he managed softly, but Savannah slapped them away without looking and stormed off down the aisle, tears of anger forming in her eyes. She felt humiliated both by her mishap and by the knowledge that the very person she'd belittled was offering her help. That was the first flicker of immediate karma touching her life, an instant humiliation that she tried her best to bury. The remainder of the flight was tense. Jonathan tried to rest, though he felt pins and needles along his bad leg and had to shift positions constantly. Janice checked on him discreetly, apologizing for Savannah's behavior. "She's having a rough time," Janice explained in a whisper. "Not that it excuses her words, but please know that she doesn't represent all of us." Jonathan managed a polite smile. "I appreciate your kindness, but it still hurts." By the time the plane landed at Los Angeles International Airport, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Savannah stood by the exit door, forcing one last plastic smile. Jonathan watched her from a distance, noticing the coffee stain on her shirt that she'd tried unsuccessfully to hide. Something about her expression teetered between aggression and despair. He felt a pang of sympathy, but the pain she'd inflicted on him was still fresh. When he finally shuffled off the plane, he tried to lock eyes with her, to see if perhaps she might apologize, or at least look contrite. Instead, she offered a curt nod and immediately turned away to attend to the next passenger. That should have been the end of their encounter, just another unfortunate tale of rude airline staff that travelers sometimes endure. But destiny, it seemed, had other plans. Months later, Jonathan's life took a remarkable turn. The purpose of his trip to Los Angeles had been to meet with a family friend who was an investor in a rising airline venture. Through his years of experience in logistics and his personal understanding of passenger services, having traveled extensively for medical treatments, Jonathan brought something valuable to the table. After intensive discussions, they offered him a leadership role in a new sister airline. They were launching, aimed at providing accessible travel options for all, including those with mobility challenges and other disabilities. Jonathan was stunned by the offer. He had never dared dream he might one day hold such a high-level position. Yet the investors were impressed not only by his formal credentials, but by his unique perspective as a disabled traveler who understood the system's failings. Most importantly, he was compassionate, a quality that set him apart in a world often driven by bottom-line thinking. He spent weeks in negotiations, finally agreeing to become Vice President of Passenger Experience and Operations. It was a lofty title, but he took it seriously, determined to root out the kinds of prejudice he had encountered firsthand. This new airline, which partnered under the umbrella of a well-known legacy carrier, had the resources and reach to make a genuine impact. Jonathan's primary objective became to foster a culture of empathy and inclusivity from the top down. Shortly after his new role began, he was asked to conduct a thorough review of various flight crews across multiple divisions of the parent airline. The aim was to identify who might be a good fit to transfer to the sister airline as they prepared for a more inclusive approach. His first few weeks were spent combing through personnel records, analyzing customer feedback, and listening to flight attendant performance recordings. He reviewed both complaints and commendations. One particular name jumped out at him like a haunting echo from the past: Savannah. He clicked on her file, noticing the airline she worked for was indeed under the same corporate umbrella. Her record was peppered with both glowing remarks, citing her efficiency and discipline, and a collection of passenger complaints referencing her abrupt manner. According to one note, she had a history of impatience with the elderly and disabled. Jonathan felt his heart pound. Could this be the same person? The name was uncommon enough that his gut told him yes. He contemplated the ramifications. She had wronged him deeply. He had not forgotten the sting of her words. Yet now, he was in a position to hold her accountable for not just that incident, but a pattern of unprofessional behavior. Still, Jonathan wasn't one to seek revenge blindly. If anything, his new role revolved around second chances and helping staff see the importance of respect. But before he made any decisions, he wanted to see her in action again. Weeks later, Jonathan scheduled a series of surprise in-flight audits. His plan was to observe crews without them knowing his identity or position, allowing him to evaluate real-time performance. He specifically requested to audit Savannah's flight, one traveling from Los Angeles to New York. He had arranged the itinerary so that Janice, someone he remembered as compassionate, was also part of the crew, hoping to see if any improvement or confrontation might occur. On the day of the audit, Jonathan arrived at Los Angeles International Airport early. Dressed in a simple button-down and slacks, he looked more like an ordinary businessman than a high-ranking executive. He carried a small bag that could easily fit under his seat, wanting to avoid overhead bin drama altogether. Despite his limp, he deliberately left his cane at home that day, relying on a discreet leg brace and making sure to take enough medication beforehand. He still walked with difficulty, but hoped it wouldn't draw too much attention. Upon boarding, he found Savannah near the front galley, scanning tickets with a perfunctory smile. She hadn't changed much, the same poised posture, the same sharply angled smile that often vanished the moment a passenger looked away. When he reached her, she studied his face briefly, uncertain if she recognized him. After a moment's hesitation, she handed him a small slip containing his seat assignment and said, "Enjoy your flight," in that same condescending tone he recalled all too well. Jonathan felt the memory of her cruelty stir inside him. He wanted to see if she had grown kinder or if she remained the same. For the moment, he kept his identity hidden, planning to observe quietly. Once again, the flight boarded fully, and Savannah went through her safety announcements with a practiced cadence. Janice worked the aisle, and Jonathan overheard her gentle interactions with passengers who needed extra assistance. She offered to store their bags, brought them blankets, and made sure they had enough legroom when possible. Savannah, by contrast, moved with the beverage cart in a methodical, almost robotic manner, rarely smiling, never asking if someone needed assistance unless absolutely necessary. Jonathan noticed a moment that triggered a flashback, a young mother traveling alone with a toddler and a baby. The mother was struggling to calm the crying children, and one passenger across the aisle was showing visible irritation. Savannah approached and did nothing except offer the mother headphones at a cost. When the mother, clearly flustered, asked if there was anything else she could do to keep her children calm, Savannah gave a dismissive shrug. "Perhaps next time, consider their nap schedules before booking a flight," she said under her breath, which Jonathan could just barely hear. The mother's eyes welled up in embarrassment. An older gentleman seated nearby offered to help by making silly faces to distract the toddler, and Janice eventually came to give them some snacks. Jonathan shook his head in disappointment. He scribbled notes in his phone, documenting everything. Savannah's attitude had changed little since that awful day. Jonathan realized that if he truly wanted to transform the airline's culture, he would have to make a decisive move. As the flight neared its end, Jonathan mentally prepared for the confrontation that would come soon after landing. He planned to reveal his position, but in a constructive way. He wanted her to realize that empathy was not just a nice extra for flight attendants. It was essential. But he also believed in accountability, and her track record suggested she might not be salvageable unless she underwent a major attitude shift. When the aircraft touched down at John F. Kennedy International Airport, Jonathan waited until most passengers had disembarked before making his move. Savannah was in the aisle, ushering people out, while Janice stood by with a friendly smile, wishing everyone well on their travels. Jonathan approached them, brandishing his passenger slip. Savannah gave him a curt nod, as if to say, "Move along," but instead of leaving, he paused. "Do you remember me?" he asked softly, his voice carrying a weight that made Janice turn her head. Savannah frowned, trying to place him. "I'm sorry." Jonathan steadied himself, forcing back any trace of nervousness. "I flew with you from Dallas to Los Angeles a few months ago. You criticized me for traveling despite my disability, spoke to me as though I was beneath you." Janice's face clouded with realization. Her eyes darted anxiously to Savannah, who looked stunned, color draining from her cheeks. She stammered, I'm not sure I recall. You may not recall me as an individual, but you likely remember the coffee you spilled on yourself during that same flight. You mocked my limp. I offered you a napkin afterward. You remember that, yes? Savannah's eyes widened, memories flooding back. She swallowed hard, words suddenly failing her. Janice stepped forward, concern etched in her expression. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I remember you. I tried. You tried to help me," Jonathan said, nodding kindly to her, "and I appreciate it to this day. Thank you for what you did then, and for what you did today for that mother of two." He took a breath, then turned back to Savannah. "I didn't reveal my position earlier because I needed an honest look at how you treat passengers. I'm Vice President of Passenger Experience and Operations for our new sister airline, and I'm here to conduct an audit." Savannah's shock exploded into fear. She blanched, unable to speak for several moments. Finally, she stuttered, I'm sorry. I didn't know that I was in a position of power?" Jonathan's voice was measured. "You see, that's exactly the problem. You should treat all passengers with respect, regardless of who they are or what you think they can do for you." Janice watched in stunned silence, uncertain whether to intervene or let the moment play out. One or two remaining passengers overheard the exchange, eyes darting from Jonathan to Savannah in awe of the unfolding drama. Savannah felt tears sting her eyes. She was terrified for her job. I know I can be abrupt, but times have been really hard. I'm so sorry if I was rude. Please, let me explain." Jonathan held up a hand. "There's a difference between having a bad day and consistently mistreating your customers. I've reviewed your record. We take these complaints seriously. I wanted to see if you'd improved. Unfortunately, today I witnessed the same indifference." His gaze hardened. "And you know what stands out to me most? You never apologized for mocking me months ago. You didn't apologize after nearly knocking my cane away. You didn't even apologize when you recognized me just now. It was always about you and your problems." Savannah began to cry in earnest, her once cool veneer shattered. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I truly am. I didn't realize you were that man, the one with the cane. It was a horrible day. I was going through heartbreak, money issues. None of that excuses what I did. I know, but I'm trying to do better." Jonathan watched her for a moment, recalling the raw sting of her insults. Part of him wanted to let her go, to fire her on the spot and make an example out of her. Another part remembered how humiliating it felt to be on the receiving end of that cruelty. If he truly believed in empathy, perhaps he had to show some of it now. "Here's the situation," he said. "I'm required to submit a formal report on this flight. What I witnessed today and what I experienced months ago don't bode well for you, Savannah. There will be disciplinary action, possibly termination, but I also believe in second chances under very strict conditions. This won't be an easy out, nor will it be guaranteed." She sniffled, nodding frantically. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'm so ashamed of how I treated you, how I've treated so many people. Please, if you can find it in your heart to give me one more opportunity, I'll prove I can change." Janice exhaled in relief, stepping closer to place a comforting hand on Savannah's shoulder. Jonathan noted the quiet loyalty. He addressed them both. "If you truly mean that, you'll undergo retraining with an emphasis on empathy and special needs awareness. You'll be put on probation for 6 months. One more complaint of this nature, and you'll be out, no questions asked." Savannah let out a trembling sigh, shoulders sagging under the weight of her emotions. "Thank you," she managed. "I'll do better. I promise." Jonathan nodded curtly. "I'll hold you to it." Savannah's tears did not end the moment Jonathan turned away. In fact, they intensified as the gravity of the situation sank in. Janice escorted her to the staff lounge in the terminal, where Savannah collapsed onto a chair, head in her hands. She cried not just out of fear for her job, but also out of genuine shame. Though it was easy to blame her personal problems for her behavior, somewhere deep inside, She knew that her conduct was rooted in her own intolerance, fueled by frustration and a sense of entitlement. Meanwhile, Jonathan filed his report. He recommended that Savannah be placed in a specialized training program focusing on compassionate communication, disability awareness, and conflict resolution. The airline executives, trusting Jonathan's judgment, agreed. They valued a positive public image, and they hoped it would also help avoid potential lawsuits down the line. For his part, Jonathan didn't want vengeance. He wanted actual improvement in the airline's culture. And so Savannah was whisked into a rigorous retraining program. She was forced to confront personal biases, study up on the challenges disabled passengers face, and learn how to practice genuine empathy. The sessions included role-playing scenarios where she had to guide a blind passenger to their seat, help an elderly woman with hearing difficulties, and show a paraplegic traveler how to board using specialized equipment. She found herself exhausted by the demands, humbled by the complexities she had once dismissed as mere inconveniences. At first, she fought against it internally, feeling singled out. But as the training progressed, she began to see the humanity behind every passenger's request. It wasn't just a job, these were real people, each with struggles she knew nothing about. Over time, her heart softened. She asked more questions. She listened. About 4 months into her probation, Savannah was assigned a flight from New York to Dallas. On this flight, she encountered a young man with a prosthetic leg who was traveling alone for the first time. She initially felt her old impatience flicker when he needed extra time to board, but then she remembered her training. She approached him with a warm smile, introduced herself by name, and asked how she could help make his flight easier. He seemed surprised at her direct kindness. During the flight, Savannah checked in on him multiple times, making sure he had enough room to stretch out and comfortable access to the restroom. When the young man disembarked, he shook Savannah's hand and thanked her with a sincerity that made her chest tighten. "You made this trip so much better than I expected," he said, a note of genuine gratitude in his voice. For Savannah, that moment crystallized the power she held to affect someone's experience. For better or worse, she continued her transformation. The passenger comment cards gradually painted a new picture of her service. Words like thoughtful, caring, and attentive replaced the old complaints. The airline executives noticed the improvement, as did Jonathan. 6 months later, Savannah completed her probation period. True to his word, Jonathan arranged a final evaluation for her, this time as a face-to-face conversation rather than a surprise audit. He invited her to the corporate offices, a sleek tower of glass and steel located near the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, where he had a private conference room set aside for the meeting. Savannah arrived, dressed in a crisp uniform and wearing a nervous, hopeful expression. She had dreaded this day, yet also looked forward to it, a chance to prove herself, to show she was no longer the person who had mocked a disabled man and viewed passengers as nuisances. Jonathan sat at the head of a large oval table, documents neatly arranged before him. He rose when she entered, offering a polite nod. She couldn't help noticing his limp was slightly less pronounced, though he still moved with caution. He gestured for her to sit, and she did so carefully. "How are you, Savannah?" he asked, voice cool but not hostile. She drew in a breath. "I'm all right, sir," she replied. "I know why I'm here, and I'm fully prepared to hear your decision." He looked over some papers. "I've read your file. Your post-probation reviews from both co-workers and passengers have been quite positive. It seems you've changed how you approach passenger service and your attitude overall." She nodded, swallowing. "I'm trying very hard. I realized how wrong I was to judge or belittle anyone, let alone someone struggling with a disability." Jonathan studied her face. He saw genuine remorse and a flicker of the humility that had been absent before. "You understand that if you revert to your old ways, "There won't be another chance," he said. "We have a reputation to uphold, and we're investing a lot in making travel accessible and respectful for everyone." She lifted her gaze. "I understand. I promise you'll never see that side of me again." The training made me realize how every small action, every harsh word can hurt someone immeasurably. I never want to be that person again. He leaned back in his chair. "I believe you." Her eyes widened in relief, but she maintained composure. "Thank you, Mr. James. Thank you for giving me this chance." "Please," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "call me Jonathan." They shook hands. Savannah blinked back tears, this time tears of gratitude rather than fear. It felt surreal that the very man she had once mocked was now offering her a form of redemption. And in that moment, she understood the depth of his character, a depth she never would have guessed all those months ago. As she turned to leave, Jonathan called her name, and she paused at the door. "One more thing," he said quietly, his voice echoing in the stillness of the conference room. "I appreciate the effort you put in. Not many people have the courage to confront their faults and change so thoroughly. I hope you continue on this path." She nodded solemnly. "I will. Thank you again." Over the following months, Savannah's transformation became an example within the airline. She even started mentoring new flight attendants, sharing her story, not shying away from admitting her past mistakes. She showed them how critical it was to offer genuine support to passengers in need. Jonathan, from his vantage point in the corporate office, occasionally heard good things about her from other executives. Some had even commented on how refreshing her honesty and newfound humility were. In a surprising twist, she and Janice became close friends. They requested to work flights together whenever possible. Passengers sometimes commented on the duo synergy, one flight attendant graceful and calm, the other bright and attentive. They once transported a group of disabled veterans, assisting them with wheelchairs, guiding them to special seating areas, and ensuring their service dogs were accommodated. The veterans remarked it was one of their smoothest flights ever. One day, Jonathan found himself on a flight to Washington, D.C. on short notice for an important meeting about expanding accessible travel services. By coincidence, Savannah was assigned to that flight. She recognized him the moment he stepped on board, and though she treated him like every other passenger courteously, with a genuine smile, she also gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, a silent thanks for believing in her. Throughout the flight, Jonathan observed her interactions with families, business travelers, and indeed a few disabled passengers who needed extra help. She moved up and down the aisle gracefully, anticipating needs before they became urgent. When a passenger in a wheelchair needed assistance using the lavatory, Savannah calmly coordinated with the rest of the crew, ensuring privacy and respect. Jonathan felt a swell of pride. This was the difference empathy could make. When the plane landed, he waited until most passengers had disembarked. Approaching Savannah, he said quietly, "That was exemplary. You and Janice have turned this flight into a genuinely pleasant experience." She beamed. "Thank you, Jonathan. That means more than I can say." He glanced at her uniform, noticing the small pin newly bestowed on her jacket, an award for outstanding service. "You earned that," he said, pointing at it. Her smile broadened, and for a moment they simply stood in a comfortable silence. Two people who had once been on a collision course of resentment and now found themselves allies in the mission of making air travel inclusive. Word of Savannah's transformation spread throughout the airline. Where once she had been a cautionary tale, someone who racked up passenger complaints, she now became an example of what training, accountability, and genuine introspection could achieve. The sister airline, under Jonathan's guidance, thrived in its mission of accessible travel. Other flight attendants were eager to join, enticed not only by better pay and benefits, but also by the sense of purpose woven into its philosophy. In another twist, Savannah applied for a mentoring position within the new sister airline, a role that would place her under Jonathan's indirect oversight. She would help train flight attendants in the very program that changed her life. While it took courage for her to apply, she felt she had something real to contribute, a lesson in humility, empathy, and second chances. Jonathan was initially unsure whether it was wise to bring her on in that capacity. After all, her transformation was still relatively recent. But upon reviewing her performance and hearing testimonies from crew members and passengers alike, he was convinced. He extended her an offer to become a training assistant, working part-time between flights to share her story and help new hires navigate the challenges of passenger service. On the day she was officially welcomed into that role, Savannah found a quiet corridor at the training center, leaning her head against the wall in disbelief and gratitude. She thought back to that day months ago when she had humiliated Jonathan and reduced him to tears with her cruelty. Now here she stood, entrusted with teaching others how to be compassionate. It was a twist of fate she never could have imagined. Later, she sought out Jonathan in his office. She knocked gently, and he looked up from a stack of documents, eyes lighting with recognition. "Savannah, come in," he said. She stepped forward, taking a seat across from him. Her eyes flicked to the nameplate on his desk, Jonathan James, Vice President of Passenger Experience and Operations. A tangible reminder of how far they had both come since that fateful flight. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, voice trembling. "I know I've said it before, but you saved my life in more ways than you probably realize." He set his pen down, giving her his full attention. "I only gave you a chance to save yourself." She shook her head. "You did more than that. You forgave me even though I had hurt you. You gave me a path to become a better person, not just a better flight attendant." They shared a moment of thoughtful silence. Finally, Jonathan spoke, voice warm. "When I was younger, I remember being told I wouldn't amount to much, that my disability would hold me back. People treated me with pity at best, contempt at worst. If I gave in to bitterness, who knows what kind of person I'd be now. I believe in second chances, especially for those who show genuine remorse and a willingness to change." Savannah smiled, tears shining in her eyes. She rose from her seat and extended her hand. "I will spend the rest of my career living up to your faith in me." They shook hands, a gesture that carried a poignant finality. No longer were they flight attendant and disabled passenger in conflict. They stood as allies, both striving to make air travel kinder, gentler, more inclusive. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, where a single cruel act became the catalyst for a powerful transformation. We saw how a hardened flight attendant discovered empathy through the very man she once mocked, proving that karma is swift and second chances are possible if the heart is truly open to change. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to create narratives that uplift, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. Stay tuned for more stories of hope, redemption, and the surprising twists life so often brings our way.